When you think of a country's central bank, you probably think of stability, maybe something a little boring. But what if I told you that one central bank, right in the heart of the EU, became the center of what some have called one of the biggest financial raids in modern history? That's what we're digging into today. It's a wild story of money, power, and family ties at the Hungarian National Bank, or MNB. So let's start with the number that this whole story revolves around. 407 billion forints. Just let that sink in for a second. This is the staggering amount of public money that prosecutors are now trying to track down. And let's be clear, we're not talking about a simple accounting mistake here. We're talking about a fortune that was deliberately funneled through a maze of foundations and very secretive funds. And how did they justify hiding where all this money was going? With this one absolutely incredible phrase: it lost its public money character. Seriously, that was the official line. Imagine asking what happened to a huge chunk of taxpayer money and being told, oh, it's not public money anymore. It's a pretty bold claim, right? So let's unpack how they even tried to make that argument stick. Right, so this brings us to Section 1, the public money magic trick. This is where it gets really interesting. How does a central bank, whose job is basically to keep the economy stable, suddenly cook up hundreds of billions in profit? And more importantly, how do you then try to convince people it's not public money? Well, it turns out there was let's call it a creative 4-step playbook. Okay, so here's how the magic trick worked. Step 1, you let your own national currency, the forint, get weaker. Now this has a side effect. The bank's stash of foreign money, like euros and dollars, is suddenly worth way more in forints. Step 2, you call that difference a profit, even though it's just on paper, right? No real new money was actually made. Step 3 is the big move. Instead of giving that profit back to the state budget where it belongs, you shove it into a bunch of brand new foundations that you control. And then the grand finale, step 4, you just declare that it's not public money anymore. Poof. Of course, not everyone bought the magic trick. This timeline shows the tug-of-war that happened next. In 2013, the MNB sets up these foundations. It takes 2 whole years, but in 2015, a court says, yeah, that's still public money. So what happens? In 2016, the ruling party, Fidesz, literally tries to pass a new law to make the money private by definition. But in a huge twist, the Constitutional Court strikes it down. It was this massive legal and political battle, and for a hot minute, it really looked like transparency was going to win the day. But here's the thing. While all those lawyers and politicians were fighting, that mountain of cash wasn't just sitting in a vault. Oh no, it was moving. And it was moving into the pockets of a very, very specific group of people. This brings us to our next section, the clan and the casino. Let's meet the players who cashed in, a tight circle centered right around the bank governor's family. So, who are we talking about? Well, first you've got Ádám Matolcsy, the son. He's the son of the MNB governor, György Matolcsy, and he's known for living large. Then there's his good friend, Balint Somlai, let's call him the court builder. His construction company almost overnight started winning all these massive contracts from the bank. And rounding out the trio is another friend, István Zárás, the asset manager. His job was to handle the complicated financial stuff, the parts designed to make the money disappear. And if you want a perfect example of how this worked in practice, just look at this table. It's about the renovation of the MNB's own headquarters. The original engineers estimated the job would cost about 27 billion forints. Seems reasonable. But the first contract, which went to Somlai's company, 54 billion. Double. And the final bill they paid him? 81 billion forints. Triple the original estimate? You just don't see numbers like that unless the person signing the checks knows the person cashing them. So where does all that money go? I mean, hundreds of billions of forints. Well, it goes exactly where you'd think it would. We're talking collections of Porsches. We're talking villas in Dubai with their own private beaches. We're even talking about a 14 billion forint penthouse in New York City. The money wasn't just sitting in a bank account. It was funding an absolutely unbelievable lifestyle. Okay, so how did they actually hide the money trail and move these vast sums around so freely? Well, that's where the real financial engineering comes in. Welcome to the money laundering machine. They used a very specific kind of financial tool that's become famous, or maybe infamous, in Hungary. And that tool is the private equity fund. Now, this might sound complicated, but the idea is actually super simple.
It's basically a black box for money. You put money in, it gets invested, but the key feature is that the ownership is a secret. You don't have to tell anyone who the real beneficiaries are. It's completely legal, but it's also the perfect way to hide who's getting rich. It's been called the Hungarian offshore for a reason.
Okay, so let's trace the money, follow the path. It's actually pretty straightforward when you lay it out. The money starts at the MNB's foundation, that's the public money. Then it gets piped into one of those secret private equity funds run by their buddy Istvan Saras. What does the fund do? It buys up a big Polish real estate company, GTC. And guess what happens next? GTC needs to renovate its buildings, and wouldn't you know it, the massively overpriced contracts go to, you guessed it, their other friend, Balin Somlai. It's a perfect circle. Public money goes in one end, and private profit for the friends comes out the other. But wait, it gets worse. This wasn't just about siphoning off money through contracts. The investment itself was a disaster. Look at this chart. The MNB's company Optima bought GTC shares for about 9 zloty each. The thing is, the stock was trading for less than 7 at the time. They paid a 30% premium. Why would you ever do that? And today, the stock is worth about 4 zloty. They've lost more than half of the public's money on this deal alone. The loss was practically guaranteed from the moment they signed the papers. You know, it's easy to get lost in all these billions and stock prices, but this whole affair had very real, very damaging consequences. It didn't just hurt the bank's bottom line. It actually wrecked the future of a university and a whole city's development plan. Let's talk about the Catch bankruptcy. This is one of the most unbelievable parts of the story. You have the university in Catch, and it has this huge pot of money for development, 127 billion forints. The guy in charge of that money, Norbert Chismadia, decides to invest it with an MNB-linked company. But get this, Norbert Chismadia was also the head of the MNB Foundation on the receiving end of that deal. He was the giver and the receiver. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. He was literally making a deal with himself for 127 billion forints of the university's money. And the investment itself, it was financial malpractice, plain and simple. The university gave away its money for a measly 2.5% return. At the same time, inflation was hitting 15%. Think about that. You're guaranteed to lose 12.5% of your money's value every single year. You'd be better off stuffing the cash under a mattress. This wasn't an investment. It was a planned demolition of the university's finances. So what does this all mean on the ground? It means the university's brand new campus is a ghost town. It's a half-built construction site just sitting there, abandoned. All the money that was supposed to finish it, to create a future for students in Kecskemét, is gone. It's locked up in those terrible GTC shares and other luxury real estate ventures, a concrete monument to a financial disaster. Sooner or later, a scheme this big is bound to spring a leak. And the dam finally broke when the State Audit Office, the Oz, dropped a series of explosive reports. This is the part of the story where you'd expect heads to roll. So let's look at what the official auditors found and ask the big question: was anyone held responsible? The auditors did not pull their punches. Their reports were a total bombshell. They found widespread mismanagement, an unjustifiably complex corporate structure, which is basically code for this was designed to be confusing and hide things. And they put a number on the damage: over 100 billion forints in lost assets. But here's the kicker. They officially filed criminal complaints for breach of trust. This wasn't just bad business. The state's own auditors said it looked like a crime. And then the story went from a financial scandal to something out of a spy thriller. Leaked emails started to surface, and they seemed to show that Ádám Matolcsy, the governor's son with no official job title, was secretly pulling all the strings. Apparently, he was using a secret email account with a female alias, Petra Kovacs, to give orders to company directors. How do we know? Because one of the execs messed up and replied to an email from Petra with "Dear Adam." Whoops. So, with all this evidence piling up, official audits, criminal complaints, leaked emails, what was the government's response? This. A spokesperson said, quote, "The government has no responsibility in relation to the operation of the central bank." That's it. Total hands off. They just pointed to the bank's independence. Which is pretty ironic, considering they're the ones who tried to pass a law to make this whole thing secret in the first place.
So here we are, hundreds of billions in damages, an abandoned university campus, a tangled web of companies and secret funds that stretches from Budapest all the way to Dubai. We have official reports calling it mismanagement, even suggesting criminality. We have criminal complaints filed, but at the end of the day, we're left with this one massive unanswered question: who is actually responsible for all this?